Welcome to Let's Deconstruct a Story. I'm Kelly Forden, the host of this podcast, and I'm really happy to welcome Toni Ann Johnson to the podcast today to discuss Dotted Out, her short story first published in the Coachella Review. The story is now a part of her novella and short story collection, But Where's Home, by the imprint Screen Door Press from the University Press of Kentucky 2026. And I'll give you a little bit here about the author. Toni Ann Johnson is the winner of the 2021 Flannery O'Connor Award for short fiction for her linked collection, Light Skin Gone to Waste, released in October 2022. Johnson's novella, Homegoing, was a semi-finalist for the William Faulkner Wisdom Award in fiction. The novel, Remedy for a Broken Angel, was released in 2014 and earned Johnson a 2015 NAACP Image Award nomination for Outstanding Literary Work by a Debut Author. In 1998, Johnson won Christopher Award and the Humanitas Prize for her screenplay, Ruby Bridges, the Disney ABC movie and true story of the young girl who integrated into the New Orleans public school system. And there is so much more. So if you want to find out more about Toni Ann, because she has done so much, her website is toniannjohnson.com. That's TONIANNJOHNSON.com. Welcome, Toni Ann.
Welcome. I totally acted like I wasn't on camera. I'm just putting my hair up.
That's okay. I'll just tell everyone, because I'm going to flip this around and this will be first. I forgot to hit record. And now we're recording the intro after everyone has left. So that's why no one else is here. And I'm also asking a very important question, which also didn't record, and that is why you chose second person POV.
Yeah. So, man, I don't remember what I said the first time.
That's okay.
But I always try out different voices, when I'm starting, to figure out what's the right voice for a story. So I'll try it in sometimes third person or first person, unless it comes to me already formed. But I think I may have tried this, in multiple ways, but also because it was in the context of the larger book, I knew what stories I already had for Olivia. So Home was an early story that was in third person. And then I knew that I had some first person for Livia in a story called Pride, more third person in another story. So I wanted to try this one. And then when I did try the second person and it was you, it kind of clicked in and it felt appropriate for this story because it became, for me, Olivia telling this to herself, almost like a pep talk, almost this is who you were, this is what's happening, and this is where we're headed. And it was, it's more like her giving herself this encouragement and ammunition to make a change. And I liked how it sounded.
Yeah. And I think that is so true. It did have that feel of narrating your own story and trying to remember how you dealt with everything. So even now I'm saying you, but it's no, you did get up this morning and you did go work out, and even though you felt terrible, and you've been through so much, you did. And it does have that feel of a pep talk. I hadn't thought of that before. And also, engineering your own story and writing into it how you want to feel about what happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think she might even be, I can't say for sure, but she might even be revising some things as she goes along, as we do sometimes, And
yeah. So sorry for the snafu here. We had a little technical difficulty. When we return now, Toni Ann is talking about the term dotted out.
Dotted out means when a man can't pass his name on because his daughter's children are then going to have the last name of their father. So his name gets kind of bred out of the family line. It also, which I didn't know until I looked it up, it also used to mean that a man couldn't bequeath property to his daughters. It had to go through to their husbands or I don't know, presumably like another male in the family, a nephew or something. So that's what it means. I don't think it's in use so much anymore, but that he was of that time. And so it did mean something to him, but I don't think he meant it as seriously as I might have taken it. But still, like, if you're going to joke, that's not really funny,
Right, exactly. Well, no, not at all. Not at all. Like, way to be really unlikable right from the start. Well, you decided in this story in particular not to use the names of the narrator or her husband. So really the only name we get is Phil's name.
Yeah, in this story, and as I said, this story is part of a larger book. So if you're reading the book, you'll know that it's Livia, but if you've only come across the story, you wouldn't know what her name is. But I think that it was just a product of the using the second person, because she's telling this to herself, so she doesn't need to remind herself like what her name is. And in families, like when you have a conversation with your parent, they're not always saying your name every time they refer to you. And so this is just this is like a story that takes place within maybe an hour of their lives, and her name just doesn't come up. But if I had written it in the third person, certainly I would have referred to her as Livia, but it just felt like it wasn't necessary to name her. What do we really lose by not knowing her name? And the husband, I have to say, like, that might just be me not wanting to get too much into who her husband is and too much about that relationship. I was trying to focus on the relationship with Livia and her father.
Right. Yeah, it seemed like, even if it wasn't a conscious choice, it seemed so appropriate that we didn't know their names, because such a big part of her is still holding on to, pleasing her father. And it just gives him so much more importance in the story than even the narrator or her husband. And it just helped me. It just made me really feel like in her own mind, he was the most important character in the story. So
that's interesting.
It worked really well for me.
Good.
It
I'm
just
glad.
conveyed that. I don't know if anyone else felt that way, but so the father is wearing an ascot, which strikes me, as a sign of power and wealth. And it was funny because when I first sent you the questions, I was like, and he didn't give her any money to go to school, because it felt like he wasn't giving her anything, but he did actually. You say here, you've earned 2 summa cum laude Harvard degrees and financed significant portions of your undergraduate and law school tuition with scholarships and loans, while your father groused about the living expenses he paid, which afforded you a shared basement apartment infested with water bugs. You ate canned generic beans on a regular basis for 7 years. And so presumably during that entire time, he wasn't asking about what she was eating. He wasn't worried about where she was living.
Yeah, this is based on my family and our father. So some of these lines are things that I was actually told. Also, the ascot, in my opinion, is kind of pretentious. Like,
very pretentious.
Ascot,
yes.
like, like,
who wears an ascot?
I don't know that Livia feels like the ascot itself is pretentious, but I felt when I started to see him wearing them, I thought he was pretentious. But anyway, he did give her money. He was cheap, absolutely cheap, but he didn't provide nothing, but he was very much about his life and his pleasures, and he was not going to forego his ski trips and his other travels and his lifestyle, the house. He had an apartment in New York. Like, there were just things that he was not going to compromise for himself, and he was saving for his own retirement. So there was just a limit. And at a certain point, he just felt like this is enough. This is all I'm going to give. And I think in the case of both daughters, they also had mothers. And so his perspective, who worked, and he was like, ask her, like, why do I have to pay for all of it? I remember my own father saying, like, I'm almost 50. You're killing me. Soon I'll be retired. Like money was just a thing for him, even though he liked to show that he had wealth. He wanted people to perceive him as wealthy. And, that was important to him, the image. But, behind the scenes, he was cheap.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. That led me to a question about using our own our own story when you're creating a short story or fictional world, because you would think it would be simpler, but in some ways it's actually harder because you can see what happened. You have in your mind's eye a place, people, and everything, but then you have to work even harder to make sure that you convey on the page what you're seeing in your mind. And then also there's the moment where you can veer off into fiction. And I'm just curious how that worked for you.
Well, I liked the freedom to fictionalize. I don't think it would be as fun if I stuck to like all the facts, and I had to fictionalize some just for privacy for other people. And, playing with voice and stuff, playing with the way people talked, and making composite characters out of neighbors and out of other people in the town, and stories that I, kind of town lore that I knew that I changed a little bit to make it fun. I definitely used the real story, but I gave myself the freedom to fictionalize because I wasn't publishing it as a memoir. And going back to like the husband's name and stuff, like I that isn't my story to tell, that part of it, like that marriage. So I I intentionally avoided going too much into that. I think the story gives a little hint of what's going on there, but I didn't want to get too much into it. And all the names are changed, but some are changed much less than others. So some are just like, they sound like the same name. They're close enough, but that was just for me, for ease. But I think that is what the fun of doing autofiction is, because the fiction is part of it. You do have the freedom to change some things, and you can condense time, you can move things around. You're really just going for the essence of what inspired the story, not necessarily each beat of the story as it actually happened. So you can add family members. Do you have a sister? Yes.
You do? Okay. Well, you didn't have to add a family member. But I was just thinking about how George Saunders said it's always good to have, two sides of a character. So you would have two characters who embody the opposite of each other. I'm thinking of his story, Mother's Day, that was in the New Yorker, how there are two women on each side of the street, and they are two different. So like Maddie is Livia's little sister, and she's completely different from Livia. And it wouldn't be as interesting a story if you didn't have another sibling who's experiencing this.
And I do have another sibling, and that is what made, there are good reasons for being inspired to write these stories. Once I got old enough to understand why it was interesting. It took me decades to understand why bother, because I had been asked to do that when I was younger, because I started writing very young, in my 20s, and people said, why don't you write about your experience, like being Black growing up in this white town? And I was like, who cares? So it took a while for
it takes a long time to process it. Yeah. Do you want to tell everyone how this story fits into the novella and short story collection? And then if people want to raise their electronic hands, I can open it up to questions as well.
Sure. So this is the last time. This story is the penultimate story in the collection, and it's the last time that we hear from Livia directly. She's mentioned in the last story from the grandmother's point of view, but it's not her point of view. And one of the early stories is from Livia's point of view as a little girl. She's 10 years old, and it's when her family is about to buy a house. And we meet her again when she's a little past the teen years. She's like 21 maybe. And then we meet her again when she's in her late 20s. And so we see her grow up. We get to see a lot more of her in this collection than in the previous collection, where she was only kind of she was in a couple of stories, but they weren't her stories. So she's much more vocal in this collection. And she is, from the first time we meet her, she is recognizing her marginalization in this family. She's kind of she's the outsider. They are outsiders within this town, and she's the outsider within this family. She's Phil's daughter from a previous marriage. We kind of see her struggle with a lot of that, like throughout the collection, just, not being the one who gets to live in the house with her dad, only getting to visit and not getting to stay, and not having her own room that's really hers. Her room is also the guest room, not going on all the family trips that she mentions that. And in this story, she's pregnant, she's about to have a kid, and her father asks her to name her daughter after him. And which, I mean, the height of arrogance. And
after all that, I just, having read the novella,
she's like, okay, I'll think about that. And then she's finally like, no. And she finally works up the nerve to tell him that she's not going to do that. No.
Mm-hmm. So she's so accomplished. What percentage of that drive do you think comes from her wanting to please him and get his attention? Does she have a feeling? I mean, I got the feeling that she says, on the outside, I'm a masterpiece, So
I'm not sure I could quantify the exact percentage, but I do think that deep down, she wants to be acknowledged for how smart she is and how successful. And that is a place where she draws her self-esteem. And I think it's the same for Phil. I think Phil draws his self-esteem from his success and what he's accomplished and his education. Like, education is a big thing for both of them. I'm not sure that Phil doesn't validate her. I think that he does recognize that she is accomplished and successful. But I think that because he's a narcissistic parent, it's about him. It's about, like, my daughter did this and you did this because I encouraged you, or, it's more, rather than that he sees her for her and who she is, and really, really sees how she feels about some of the choices that he's made and how he's made her feel. She has a hard time getting that. Like, he doesn't give her that. And she is accomplishing, and he's like, yes, my successful daughter. Yes, my well-educated, brilliant daughter. But I don't think he sees her pain or her heart. And I don't think she knows how to ask for that. And I also don't think if she did ask for it, that he'd be capable of giving that, because that would force him to have to acknowledge that he missed that. He wasn't there for her emotionally. He wasn't capable of being a good emotional support. So, yeah, I don't know what the percentage is, but I do think that is something that drives her.
I mean, his own childhood trauma, I think he was the son who wasn't loved, we find out, and then she is smart in that she realizes that this is really going to affect her later on, as a mother, as a parent.
Yeah.
And that's a really scary thought when you don't have modeling, good parenting modeled.
It's not in this. Oh, well, maybe it's a little bit in this story, but she did have a grandmother, so she didn't have great parents. Like, obviously, we learn in this story that her mother wasn't very affectionate or caring, but she did have a grandmother, so she had some modeling. But I think that, yeah, I mean, it could be scary, but I think that Livia is smart enough and determined enough to make a choice. Like, I wasn't given that affection, but I can do that. That's something just a physical thing that she can do. Now, whether or not some of her issues are going to play into her parenting. We don't know because we don't see her parent yet. And probably some of those issues will be present. But as far as just embracing her child and hugging her child when she cries and kissing her, I do think that those are things that she will be able to do because she's saying, I am not going to do what I didn't get. I'm not going to, keep affection from my daughter. I'm going to give her that affection. And I think that's doable, even if some of her stuff may still bleed over into, their relationship.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. Okay, let's talk about Pangea as a metaphor for her family life after the divorce. She says she's a piece broken off in an island. And I was just curious, throughout the story, I had the sense that she was still struggling. Probably she struck me as someone who's really accomplished, but I think it's a little, I don't want to say this about her because we have this moment, she's in this situation with this difficult parent, right? So she might be really happy the rest of the time. And when he goes away, she becomes, it's like a burden has been lifted. But in the story, she seems to still be really struggling. And I was just wondering about, how you came up with the idea as Pangea for the metaphor for that. It's a great metaphor, but.
Thanks. I don't remember how I came up with the metaphor, but I guess I did feel that the moment when her father tells her that he's leaving and she has to wrestle with that and she has to process wait, what does that mean? So we had this family unit and now it's broken, and she felt isolated. Even though we learn that her father wasn't there for her emotionally, we can kind of get that as a little girl, he was more attuned to her than her mother, because she says that he was the one who actually wanted to do things with her and spend time with her. So when that was taken away, she felt kind of unmoored and adrift and, just out there by herself.
Right.
And I think that feeling of being alone and isolated, I think that carried through for this character. So yeah, there's that. And then there's also the idea of a broken, she was a branch to his tree and she's broken off. Mm-hmm. And yes, she says a broken branch can still grow, which she in this story, she keeps sort of affirming herself, what she did, even though these things happened to her, I kept going. I kept growing. I kept creating myself. I kept, making myself who I am. So even though she feels like she was deeply wounded, she didn't let it stop the creation of her life, and she was determined to flourish in the ways that she could. But we're seeing in this story that deep down, underneath all those accomplishments, there's still a little girl whose feelings are hurt. She's throughout the story sort of trying to get her little girl to a place where she's going to move forward from there and hopefully be okay.
Right. Well, I see that Emma has her hand up.
Oh, okay.
So.
Hey, Emma.
Hi, Toni. How are you?
Hi. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I had a question about the voice. We don't get to hear from Livia very much throughout this book. And in her story, you use the second person. And I think the second person was in the first story, the introduction of Maddie. And then the last one was from the beyond with Emily. Mm-hmm. How did you decide to mix up the voices of each of the family members, especially ones we don't hear from much, like Livia and Emily?
That started with the style of the original book. So this started with Light Skin Gone to Waste. And originally, these stories that are in this book were in my original draft from Light Skin Gone to Waste. It was one long thing. And it's just something that I like. I like doing different voices, especially differentiating a 10-year-old voice from a teenage voice and a teenage voice from a 35-year-old voice. I like playing with voices, and I do that in the previous collection also. for me, it just makes it more fun to write. I also like to play with tense. So, future tense sometimes, second person tends to be more present tense. So I just like the heterogeneity of voice, and I don't want to be bored when I'm writing. So I just sort of do different things to make it fun for myself. Every time I make that choice, it presents a challenge because I have to kind of stick within the limitations of whatever that choice is. So, that's part of it too. So I tried to do everything. In this particular collection, we have third person, first person, second person. We even have first person plural. I guess it's probably like something that came out of my MFA program. So when I went to my MFA program, I hadn't studied how to write fiction, and all these options were presented to me. I had never heard of first person plural. Like, what's that? And, they gave us examples. And so, that's where this book started, was in that program. So that's how it turned out.
Had another thought about second person, which is I had a family member who was a politician. Yeah, which is embarrassing. No, but anyway, when I went back to newspaper articles trying to find out more about this person, they often wrote in second person. And so then I did a deep dive into some psychology, articles and books and, why do people use second person? And it was really interesting. They say that people use second person to distance themselves from the story a little bit, and also to create the sense that they're the hero in the story, that they're fashioning the story, that it's not happening to them. So they would say things like, you did this, and then you went here and you talked to so-and-so, and, and it's just a fascinating distancing mechanism as well.
That is fascinating. And I think that rings true.
But it also brings the reader in, because you're saying the reader's kind of implicated in it as well. I was shocked by how terrible her mother is, really almost as bad as, if not worse than her father, especially the scene where the mother says, "You were crying, so I knew you weren't dead," when she falls down the stairs. And, I was thinking, like, usually there's one parent who's more nurturing than not. But in this case, the one who's more nurturing is also deeply flawed. So here you have like someone who's almost abusive, and then you have a narcissist. So I wondered about the decision to make the mother so
Fortunately,
awful.
That's research-based. I'm sorry to say. That's all I'll say about that.
I get it. Yeah. So, of course, a father who's narcissistic and has his own agenda is not even going to notice that the daughter has now been left with someone who's terrible.
Yeah. And the mother isn't physically abusive the way Velma is. She's just uninterested, just, more into her own pursuits.
Right.
Not, her mother got pregnant at 19, or they had maybe even 18. They had her at 19. So very young mother. The marriage was not because they were in love, but because she was pregnant. So that's another thing, about the time. Like, Livia is born in the 50s. In the 50s, if you got pregnant, you got married. If you were from, a good family or something, you married as quickly as possible. So that was a problem there. And from Livia's point of view, Phil was the nicer parent.
Right. I mean, she didn't have much to choose from. So
right.
Yeah, it's like the lesser of two evils. What role do you think, now this isn't in the story, but it is in the book, and so I wanted to touch on it. What role do you think that the trauma of the racism that they experience in this, so they, for those who don't, obviously no one knows yet because your book's not out yet, but unless they read Light Skin Gone to Waste, which is also takes place in Monroe. Is it called Monroe as well? Okay. So in this town, it's in upstate New York, right? Mm-hmm. Monroe.
Well, technically it's mid-state, but if you're a New Yorker, anything north of the George Washington Bridge is upstate. So,
right.
But real upstate people do not consider it upstate, but our family did. That's what we called it.
So they moved there in the 60s, 70s. It's the 60s still, 60s. And it's almost completely a white town, right? At least on, there's the other side of the track. The real estate agent is a real jerk, and he keeps trying to get them to move to the other side of the tracks where the other Black families live, but they're very successful. They don't want to do that. So they experience a ton of racism, and then Livia experiences it growing up. So does Maddie. Well, Livia not as much as Maddie.
A lot less, some, but a lot less. I mean, I didn't really write about her. She's aware of it, but she didn't live there. She visited. Maddie's the one who lives there full time. Livia visits on weekends, so she experiences it much less.
Yeah. So what role do you think this plays in Phil's attitude or neurosis?
Oh, I think
it
plays, as written, it plays a lot. Like there were just like subtle condescensions from the professionals who he befriends in the town. So he joins the tennis club and he meets some of the other professionals. It's largely a working class town, but there are a few professionals, and there's this little tennis club. It's not fancy. It's not like a cool, country club or anything. It's just a little tennis club. And the other doctors and lawyers and, professional people play tennis there, and they befriend him. And, this is the early 60s, the early to late 60s when he's forming these relationships. And I think it would be hard to avoid racist ideas at that time. So it's not necessarily that these people were bad people. Like, they are willing to play tennis with him and even socialize with him. But there are ideas about what Black people are supposed to do or be or have that they don't know, because they don't know any other Black people. And so there are things like, for example, I don't remember if it's in this book or in the previous book, but there's just things that some of those people say to Phil about what he can't do. He can't have a Great Dane. He can't, have a certain type of woman, or he can't achieve certain things because he's Black. And in that time, it kind of meant second class. Even if you were financially equal to somebody who was white and middle class, because you're not white, you are pushed to a different class in most situations socially. And he was fighting against that. So if sort of the Updike world, he's living in a bubble sort of like that. And he's behaving as an Updikean type of man, but he's Black. And so he's, hanging out with these guys, playing tennis with them, maybe drinking with them, sharing stories with them, but he's Black. And there, there's just still this sort of subtle condescension that he
like microaggressions or Barrett has a question.
So one of the things that was really interesting to me when you were talking about boundaries and the father having no sense of the boundary or feeling like the world owes him something, or his daughter, just what his issues are. I thought all that was fine, but I found it really interesting in terms of the point of view that second person point of view seems to go past boundaries, and like it seems to sort of like you break a fourth wall here and there. So it's interesting because in a story about boundaries, you break all the boundaries in telling it. So that to me was the genius of the story. That I don't really have a question. I just I loved how that all came together. So
I'm glad that worked for you. I mean, I guess the way that you're phrasing it almost feels like it's a mistake, but I don't know.
No. I thought. I mean, I think that. You do it. If the argument is that, this is not my argument, but I've heard some people say that the second person pushes the reader away. Well, and there's another way to think about it, which is that it's absolutely fine to push the reader away as long as you're going to do something to in turn bring the reader back and go a little extra mile to bring the reader back. And I think you do that very well by just letting us feel very intimate. We're in the bathtub basically with her, and and so you use that sort of warmth and intimacy with the reader to bring the reader back if the reader should have felt pushed away.
Okay.
I did not, you know.
Okay. Thank you
So
for
anyway,
saying that. When I read second person, I don't feel pushed away. Like I become them in some way. I either become them or I absorb the story as it's being told to me. So I don't personally feel pushed away. So I find it interesting that that's something that is thought about the second person. I feel like sometimes for me when a story is saying you rather than I feel like it's almost inviting me. I think that it's inviting me to be the you if I choose to. So I feel like a different way, but I can see the other side of it. But I think that's just something about fiction and writing, is that the reader brings who they are to whatever they're reading. So you can't really control like how all readers aren't going to perceive something the same way or feel the same way about a choice, because we're all different. So,
and Emma wrote here, I feel like I am controlling the story while reading in the second person, like I am deciding how the character feels. It's immersive. Yeah, it has a feeling of omniscience, but closer than omniscience. Like you have a little bit more room to enter the character, but also be immersed with the character. I get what she's saying there. It's very cool. I keep thinking about Lori Moore and all her second person stories. Anybody else have any questions? Someone else wrote, Cynthia wrote, I completely agree about the second person. I feel pulled closer. I am looking through their eyes. And Wanda said it resonated with me because I did feel closer to character. Having read the first book, I'm thrilled to see Livia successful and growing and finding her voice. That's cool.
Yay, that's good. Thank you, Wanda.
I was wondering about, because you've written screenplays as well, I always wonder what part of writing a story comes first to the person. A lot of people, some people are scene setters and some people are better at dialogue and some people are better at interiority. What part of the story comes first for you?
Well, with this book, it's different than with other things I write because this book is based on my family. And so almost all of the stories are kind of based on some event that I continued to think about after I was, removed from that situation. And so, but that's not always the case. Everything I write is not autobiographical or about my family. But in this particular case, those events came first. That's the first thing. And then I think, I'm not sure. I mean, it's hard to say. Like, I can't really, I don't think about it that way. Like, it's kind of a soup and it's like, it's all in there. But I think that the story world is already kind of formed because it's a combination of memory and imagination. So I'm, using stuff that I remember from those events and then maybe adding a little color to it, like, dressing it up a bit. And so there's the story world. And then within the story world, there's like, well, what are the main ideas in this? And then how are you going to use the trajectory of the story to elucidate those ideas? And are there motifs that you want to continue? It just sort of all goes in there. And then sometimes dialogue might come early, like if I remember lines that people say, but usually I try to set the scene first and see like where I am and what's happening and what I want to say. And then the dialogue is later. But I do try to use what I know about the craft of visual writing. I do try to use that when as much as I can, so that hopefully, like when the reader reads the story, they can actually see it as like a little movie in their head. I do hope, I try to do that. And then I try to make, like, if the real dialogue was, not that interesting, I try to make it more fun. So I do keep in mind, there is some level of like entertainment factor that I want to have. So,
absolutely. But
it does feel, I can't say that it's a linear process that's like, okay, set the scene,
right,
figure out the plot. Like, I don't think it's like that. I think it's a mess at first. I think it's just
it's so interesting It's always different with everybody I talk to because some people are just, straight dialogue and then they go back and fill everything in. Some people, some people are just inspired by one interaction they overhear and then they create a whole story from that. And so I always like to ask that. Chantel said, I was not aware of the larger book this is a part of, but just from this short story, I got a sense of all their complexity, traumas, and backstory, and with that, a sense of compassion for all of them. Second person was effective as it was just like the overthinking awareness and inner voice that comes from someone in a process of healing and transformation. We'll definitely be reading the rest. She said.
Thank you.
But I had a question about the ending. We're running a little bit low on time. So, okay, it ends with this line. So you hear a whisper in your mind, no, wash your hands, 7-year-old you, she's still there. You walk down the hall toward your bedroom and toward your husband, and you whisper back that you hear her. You tell her your hands are fine and the two of you are going to celebrate because joy is on its way. And if you'd never known sadness, you couldn't appreciate the elation you feel looking forward to your new girl and how brightly she'll shine. And I'm just curious about, it seems to me like a perfect ending, like it might have just flowed right out of you. And I like the way that you didn't wrap it up in a bow. Like the 7-year-old girl is still there and she's still going to have to process all that trauma for a long time. And yet at the same time, you leave us with Livia seeming very strong and very determined.
Yeah, I think she's hopeful. I think she's hopeful about giving her daughter a different childhood than she had. And I think she hopes to make her daughter feel more loved than she felt.
And did that come easily to you, the ending? Did you, or did that?
No, I think I played around with that line for a long time. And the way that I know that when I stop is when I have trouble reading it aloud without crying. Like if I'm moved by it, then I feel like, okay, I'll go with this because I think that's kind of what I go for is feeling some sort of emotional engagement myself. So, and I always read everything out loud to myself, and I always imagine myself reading these stories aloud because I was an actress, and there's a part of me that still like wants to play all these parts, so I can't read that line without tearing up because I think it's really happy, but it's also sad. It's hopeful and it's uplifting, and it's like, yes, like my girl is going to be shining in the world, but at the same time, there's like a grief but her little girl, she didn't really get to do that, and so I'm kind of moved by that and happy for her, but also I'm sad for her too.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. This is published by a university press, and since we're all writers in the room, I was wondering if you have any advice on writing or publishing that you want to share with everyone. I know that when we make those choices, which I always do too, because like to have an unconventional novel with multiple POVs and stuff, it's not an easy sell to the big five. Yeah. I mean, they're just so rigid. It must be 80,000 words. It must be blah blah blah.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that I can't give advice, but I will say that what I finally decided that what was most important to me is to publish my work so that it's out there, it's available. Yes, I would love the big five deal. Yes, I would love to make money, but I'm older now. Like I made my money in the screenwriting world. I'm basically retired. And so it doesn't matter. What matters is my body of work. And I'm trying to publish as much as I can and have, a body of work. And these last 3 books have all been connected. So if somebody reads one and they like it and that's not enough, there's 2 other books to choose from. And there might be another one in the future. And I have an agent now. I sold this book without an agent through a contest. And that's how my last 2 books have been published through contests. So Light Skin Gone to Waste didn't sell as a novel. I had an agent submit it. It didn't sell. I submitted it to the Flannery O'Connor Award and it won, and that's how I got published. And the book before that was a novella. You know how hard it is to sell a novella. It's like, it's almost impossible. So really, one of your options is contests. And so I was just fortunate enough to win a contest and get that one published. But at the end of the day, like, you want to have your work out there, and you can send it to a big five, and if it doesn't get published, then you can give up and let it sit in a drawer. I'm just not willing to do that. Somebody will publish your book.
I just think it's stunning what a huge disconnect that something can win like such an enormous prize. The Flannery O'Connor doesn't get much bigger than that, and not be picked up by a big five. Like, it just... it just tells me that their priorities. Yeah.
When it went out with the agent, it was almost 500 pages, and it had most of the stories that are in But Where's Home. I added 3 new stories to But Where's Home, but it was the whole saga. It also included the novella that got published separately. So it was a big book. I didn't even like it, to be honest. I thought it was too much, but that's what that agent liked, and that's how she wanted it. And I have to say, like, I've since seen other books that are big like that are very long, that have many, many, many stories. I wasn't able to sell it like that. And so that's why the book is pulled apart, but it was harder for the editors at the big fives to see a clear kind of theme it was just so much. And so the first book had a different, it was more about Maddie and her issues with the isolation of being Black in a white community, and also the issues with her parents' crazy marriage. So this book has that, but it's also like all the stories sort of touch on the idea of what home is and how do we create it, so it has its own separate theme. And so I think maybe, that's why I couldn't sell it as, as that big, big book. Like, people didn't know what to make of it. And it's just like so much stuff.
Well, people have shorter attention spans too. So it's probably good that it was broken into 2 books, because sadly we can't handle it.
Necessary. Like, I would, if it had gotten published, I'm not sure. I think that maybe like pulling it apart and having smaller chunks of it are easier to digest, and maybe people can grasp it better. And so that was better. But I was hoping at the time to make a big splash and have big money in it. That didn't happen. But, if we're all writers here, you want people to read your work. And maybe the big thing will happen. Maybe you will. Like, there's a friend of mine who's on here who had the biggest splash book of any book of anyone I know in the world, Oprah book pick. And that's great. We don't all get that. Do I still want that? Yes, I would love it. But I'm not going to stop publishing just because I can't do that myself,
Well, and I think that's the key. Like, you have to just keep doing your work. I mean, that's why we feel compelled to do it, and we shouldn't let anyone stop us. I'll end on this comment here from Sonia. I love this story because of the way Toni Ann describes that jagged hole of childhood abandonment. It felt so real. It actually hurt, especially seeing her work 70-hour weeks just to prove she's enough for her dad, who still won't give her credit. It felt cathartic to watch her finally choose her own daughter's name and peace of mind over his dotted-out nonsense, basically telling him the cycle of seeking his approval ends with her. That's exactly how I felt, too.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
That's great.
Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for being here. It was really fun to talk to you, Toni Ann. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.